Hi, everybody. So thanks much for giving us your valuable time today. We really appreciate it. Today's topic is self-service. And what's interesting about self-service, this is one of those very subtle topics that seems on the surface to be, relatively obvious, perhaps. It's easy to turn on self-service options on your IVR and offer things like account balance or directions to your business or whatever it might be. But doing self-service well, we think, from having been doing contact centers and customer service for a long time, is actually fairly challenging. So we want to go into some of the more subtler aspects, I think, of delivering good self-service today, and hopefully you'll find it valuable. As Kath said, please at any time, chat your questions in. We'll deal with all the questions at the end, but feel free to enter them at any time. Okay, so we have a little bit of market research tucked in among the slides here. We used three main sources of information for statistics and research. There's a survey done in the UK by a company called Contact Babel. They do it about self-service very specifically, called the Inner Circle Guide to Self-Service. We sponsor that report, so we are actually able to provide that to you if you would like it. And that is one thing that you can do at the end of the webinar is to request that from us. Similarly, the Contact Center Decision Makers Guide. We actually have a US and a UK version of that. And we sponsor both of those as well. So we're able to give that out as a free piece of research. And I'll try to indicate when we go kind of where the data is being summarized from. And then we have a partner, Dimension Data. We have a global contact center benchmarking report from them. That one we're not able to distribute. There is a summary of that report available online on the Dimension Data website. So if you want to get a summarized version of that, you can just go onto that website and download it. The full report is a bit more expensive. Of course, they offer that as well. But anyway, we took statistics out of these three research categories, these three papers, and I will tuck that in among the slides here. But wanted to start out by talking about why a business would want to undertake the cost of setting up and delivering self-service to customers. I think there are a couple of very obvious reasons. One is it does save you money. We'll talk about exactly how it saves you money in a slide or two here, but it absolutely does. It is a cost-saving thing. But self-service is also one of those unique things that simultaneously saves you money while also making your customers happy. We live in a world now where customers want to be able to get access to information without necessarily having to wait on hold for a live person and then explaining the situation to a live person. They might want to just get on a website or through an IVR or through text messaging, get access to fast and easy information like the account balance, right? And those are the two, I think, obvious reasons why you as a business would want to set up self-service. But there are, I think, some less obvious reasons, things that you may not have thought of, but that are absolutely the case when you set up and deliver self-service. And one of those, it does let you provide 7x24 service. So even if your contact center, your customer service agents are not available, you are still almost always able to get access to self-service engines. That IVR is always on. That website is always on. So it does let you provide this. We don't always think of that, but that is a tremendous benefit to customers. Another less obvious reason is it does increase the service level of your contact center, and it reduces customer abandonment rates in the contact center. How so? Well, if you think about it, if your agents are fielding fewer interactions, that some of which are being handled by your self-service engine, website, IVR, whatever, then they will be more available to take more complex calls, and therefore they will be there'll be a greater agent to call ratio available in your contact center. And similarly, that means that hold times, waiting in queue, will go down, and that in turn will reduce abandonment rates. So it actually does have a very positive impact on lowering hold times and increasing service levels. And then related to those agents getting the more complex calls and not having to deal with those mundane calls where they're doing a password reset, or they're providing information that is commonly asked for in FAQs, your agents are now happier because they are dealing with more interesting calls or emails or chats or whatever it might be. And that in turn will lower the attrition rate. And we've seen this time and time again in contact centers where we've deployed pretty good self-service engines that take those mundane calls away from those agents. It actually can lower the attrition rate for agents who leave you. And as we know, we've done this in previous talks, agent attrition is a huge problem in contact centers. I live in the US, and the average attrition rate for contact centers in the US is 29%. Almost a third of agents leave their jobs every year. It's extremely expensive to replace them because you have to hire, you have to train, and so on. So that's a huge benefit that comes out of the deployment of self-service. Here's how we might see self-service in play in a full-blown customer journey. Let's take a patient dealing with a healthcare facility. The first thing they might see is an appointment reminder from the facility saying, do you remember your appointment is on this day? And maybe they have to change that appointment. They can't make that appointment. So then they can link directly from the reminder into a web page or an app that can allow them to change the appointment. From there, maybe they need to talk to someone. Now we'll see in a second what the elements of this journey are that are actually self-service and what isn't. But clearly when they talk to someone, that's not really a self-service portion, although the nurse in this case could be equipped with information about the patient that's provided in an automated way. And from there, they might fill out a form in advance of their visit to the doctor. That filling out of the form is again through a website or an app. They go see the doctor, of course, and then after that doctor visit, they get their results online. So now with online charts and online visit summaries and so on, we can now see everything after our visits summarized nicely for us. So what we're seeing here is there's a portion of the journey that's self-service, and it's the majority of the journey in this particular scenario. And the part of the journey that actually is live service, talking to an agent, of course there's the doctor visit as well, is a small portion of the journey. But even with through a variety of techniques, we're able to automate or self-serve through most of this customer journey. That's a huge cost savings. If every appointment had to be rescheduled through a live contact, those are fairly time-consuming things. And more customers want to be able to use automated systems to be able to do these kinds of things themselves. Okay. So I wanted to get to, as we spoke about earlier, that self-service does lower costs, and it may be somewhat obvious, but let's talk about why and how self-service lowers cost. Here's some information from the Contact Babel reports that we were referring to that summarizes where the cost is in a customer service center. And as we can see here, labor, the salaries of the people who work there, either agents or managers or the supporting IT staff, is by far the largest cost in the contact center. And yet the maintenance of the platforms, the technologies themselves, is a very low percentage. So the math works out very, very favorably for self-service here, Because if we can automate in that 7.2% and yet take away from those salaries, we reduce the number of agents required, or we reassign those people to do more valuable tasks, then a technology investment in that small slice can greatly improve the efficiency of the larger slice. With a very small percentage of the total, we're having an impact on a very large percentage of the total. And that's a really good way to show the multiplier effect, right? Where, a minor investment can actually significantly impact your more major investment. Here's another interesting aspect of this whole thing, is if we look at the fact that agents are required on live interactions, then we can see a vast difference between the cost of live interactions and the cost of self-service. Just as an example, and here again, we're looking at Contact Babel for the most part information here. There's a bit of data on web from Forrester, but the average cost, this is a US number, of an inbound agent call is $5.52. What about an email? Well, an email is about $3.50. Why? Well, not because an email requires that much IT infrastructure, but really because the agent has to spend a significant amount of time replying to that email, reading it, analyzing it, looking up information, and replying. What about a web chat? About $3. Again, it's lower, possibly because agents can handle more than one chat at a time, typically, but it is significant. It's still 60% or so of the cost of a call. What happens when we go into self-service? A self-service call is about 70 cents. So we're at about 1/8 the cost of a call that goes to a live agent. Again, why? Because we're paying that agent's time in the form of salaries and benefits and facilities to house that agent. What about web self-service? Significantly lower, about 10 cents per interaction. So 10 cents compared to $5.52, that's 55 times greater for a call than for a web self-service visit. And that's a tremendous savings. Imagine that you can take 10% of your calls and deflect them to the web or to the IVR. You will save a vast amount of money across the thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of interactions that you might have with your customers. So here it is in kind of nickels and dimes and adding up via the multiplier effect again. We're seeing a tremendous benefit for whatever live interactions you can deflect to self-service. Now, it's key, of course, that your contact center is sitting there waiting, because if the interaction gets more complex, then the person has to go to a live person, and they've got to know that they can get to live help if they need it. But as long as they're relatively self-sufficient, and in a lot of cases they will be, and we'll see what those cases are in just a second, they should be able to go into self-service engines and get a vast amount of help without having to deal with a live person. Let's take a look at those use cases. Where would self-service engines provide the biggest bang for the buck? Got a little chart here that shows us the volume of interactions coming into a business, low all the way up to high, and against that, the complexity of those interactions. And if we fill in these boxes with some examples, I think you'll see kind of the difference. We'll pick like one or two from each category here. So a low volume but simple interactions might be, say, a political survey. Why is that low volume? Because it only happens once every few years, perhaps. But so it's low volume, but it's a very simple thing to do via self-service. You just collect answers to questions, and and then you capture that in a database and you report on it, and that's it. A special offer might be another example of a low volume thing, because it's special. It only happens once in a while, but it's simple to play that offer out to customers and allow them to select whether they want that offer. That happens on retail websites all the time, where we see a lower priced item that's on sale, and if you click now, you can purchase that item at a significant discount. What happens though when you get up to high volume, but still simple transactions? Account balance, a great example, right? Where you contact your bank, you need the balance on your account, or maybe you need to transfer funds from one account to another, those kinds of things. There are potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of these kind of transactions flowing through a significantly sized bank every month. And so that is kind of showing us that it's not that difficult to implement that particular kind of self-service, but you're going to get a lot of bang for the buck because it happens so often. Checking on the status of a delivery from a retailer, or confirming an appointment like we saw in our healthcare scenario. Again, lots of those kinds of interactions for that business, and yet not that hard to implement from a self-service perspective. Well, what happens when we look at complex interactions? If we look at something in the banking industry, a loan request, where someone needs to fill out a form and get qualified for a loan. Could that be implemented via self-service? It could, but there you're potentially looking at their credit rating. You've got business logic in there to satisfy the request. It is more complicated to implement that, and it has to use the business rules that say the particular bank needs to implement. But it could happen a lot. There could be a high volume of those. So is it worth it to do that in self-service? Interesting question, and one, it depends a lot on the variability, the different kinds of loan requests that come in and how complex they do get. Imagine online gaming. Complex to implement a game online, but once it's implemented, a very high volume of interactions go through it potentially. So you can see there that it's starting to get a little interesting in terms of what makes for a good self-service type of interaction. And then you get into the lower right quadrant, where it's low volume and complex, a negotiation on price, a very expensive product, specially customizing a very expensive product, or trying to do diagnosis on a product that's failing. These things can be very, very complex, but might not happen all that often. So if we take a look at where the biggest bang for the buck is, it's definitely in that high volume, simple complexity quadrant, and then it drifts into lower volume or more complex, but with the other favorable dimension. Is it worth it ever to do the low volume complex interactions and try to do those in self-service? It might be. And right in the middle there we have automated courses, and we're seeing that a lot from online colleges that offer courses that are almost completely automated in terms of taking tests online and and having those tests automatically graded by the system and so on. There's an example perhaps of something that maybe somewhat lower volume. It's not like paying a bill, which is high volume, and it is complex, but potentially there is bang for the buck because I'm eliminating the need for an expensive, say, teaching resource. So there's a lot to the use case, and of course all of your own businesses will have your own specific use cases, but this is a bit of a way of a kind of approach or framework to evaluate whether or not a self-service interaction type is worth it. Talking about what customers are actually doing, there's a lot of different methods now available for self-service. We'll start at the top with websites, right? So according to Contact Babel, again, website FAQ lookups is available in about 89% of businesses. So Very, very high volume of businesses are offering the ability to look up information on the website. And it is relatively low cost to do that, especially if the information being provided is very self-contained and is not variable. It doesn't change very often. Let's go down a little bit in terms of prevalence to IVR, DTMF-based self-service, touch toning in your way through the self-service engine, typing in your customer ID, typing in the fact that you want to get an account balance, and so on. About half of businesses are doing true DTMF-based IVR self-service. The cost goes up a little bit from the website because you've got to build that workflow in your IVR engine, and you've got to build that integration point to the data that the customer is asking for, but it's not terrible, right? And so this one falls into the yes, often done category. Similarly, implementing a mobile app, so the ability to take the website and have it accessible from a mobile device and or deliver an app from the business out to the customer so they can get that information, is again about half of businesses, as is being able to proactively send out emails to customers notifying them of something occurring. Your order has been shipped or whatever that might be. It goes down a little bit in prevalence when you get that same proactive use case but delivered through SMS, through text-based notifications. Why would that be lower? I think one of the reasons is probably because of the need to interface to an SMS gateway, which requires you typically to interact with a third party who has that gateway. Email can often be done through your own email server environment, but when you want to do SMS, you've got to contract the outbound through a gateway provider who can offer you other services to make life easier for you in terms of those notifications. So about a quarter of businesses are doing that today. And we're all getting very, very used to getting SMS texts now about our appointments or about an order being shipped or whatever it might be. And then we start running into the techniques for self-service that are much lower prevalence and much higher cost. Speech-enabled self-service through an IVR is a relatively old technology now. It's been around for 15, 20 years, and speech enablement of IVRs through intelligent speech recognition has gotten significantly better in the last 5 years. But it's still the case that doing a really good workflow in a speech-enabled IVR can be tricky. You need to contract with someone who knows what they're doing because of the lots of different ways that a customer can speak the information they're looking for or speak the functionality or access they're looking for. So it can get very tricky. So as a result, only 9% of businesses have implemented this. And even lower is the virtual assistant or chatbot. And this is newer technology, and this is where through text media, you're able to converse with someone online or with speech, but it actually is presented as almost as a person, but that person is a robot or a bot, or even a virtual face appearing on a website. You know, there are lots of different ways to do this, but it is pretty complex, and we'll talk about why. So if you look at that cost scalable dimension there, you see all those things that are in the tens of thousands. When you start straying up into more complex, sort of plain speak kinds of interactions where the customer can literally say anything, then we're drifting into implementations that could cost hundreds of thousands, depending, of course, on the complexity and variability of the information you're providing. Okay, so if we go from there into what does it take to implement self-service, tried to create some challenges here that are common across all the methods we just talked about. So one of those challenges is supporting the appropriate media channels. We just talked about the fact that IVR or websites are pretty common. But if we look at the source here is the Dimension Data Survey we were talking about earlier. If we look at the prevalence or preference of interaction types by age group, the under 25 age group prefers social media as their #1 interaction. But as soon as you get a little bit older, that jumps significantly down the popularity chain here. Whereas phone is, where is that, 4th among the under 25 age group, but then increases dramatically as you go up in age from 2nd to 1st, and then stays at 1st for everyone over the age of 35. So there's a dramatic difference in interaction preferences based on the age of the customer. And you kind of have to ask yourself, what are the appropriate media channels for my audience? Who are my customers? Where do they fall in this continuum? And what do I need to do when I translate those interactions into self-service transactions? Do I need to support those same channels? Similarly, if I need to identify the customer in order to provide the self-service, you don't always need to identify the customer. If someone is just calling up for the weather or the sports news from today, that is, who the customer that is calling really doesn't have anything to do with that unless they have to be authenticated in order to access that service. But often the self-service you provide does require customer identification, and the primary technique there is identifying them based on personal information, some kind of account code or password, or an answer to a personal question that they had previously provided to you. That kind of thing can allow you to quickly and with a reasonable degree of accuracy identify who's calling or texting or emailing or whatever it might be. But an emerging technology for customer identification is voice biometrics. Just as we were talking about the fact that speech recognition has improved dramatically in the last few years, so has the ability to recognize someone's voice, their unique voice print. And commonly the way this works is they speak a word when they initially sign up for the service, and that word gets voice printed in your system. And then when they come back in, they're asked to speak that same word, and that authenticates them. It's a waveform match of their voice to your system, and it does work. Now, if you have hundreds of thousands of customers, this may be difficult to do, and there may be some degree of error in the data. But if you have hundreds or thousands of customers, then voice biometrics is emerging as a nice way to ensure you're talking to the right person. Sorry, slide is failing me here. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Real quickly, the integration to the systems and data sources that you require in order to self-serve is another possibly significant challenge to implementing good self-service. You might have to do this anyway because you want to the agents have to be able to look up that data for a live call or a live interaction. So once you've implemented it for your agents, theoretically, you can transform that same integration into what the self-service engine accesses. But here, again, there's a variety of different kinds of interfaces depending on the self-service type, from calendar systems to change an appointment, to various information sources, to processing a transaction, and even to diagnostic tools for more complex self-service and so on. So, the interface is a key part of self-service typically, especially when things change over time or things have to be transacted within the self-service engine. And then the last category here is really about the more complex bot-style self-service engines, where you might need to tune the knowledge base, where you might need to develop a connected semantic knowledge tree, where you're connecting various topics together, and you can go from one topic to another. I mean, if you think about the bot, where you're actually entering information into the bot, and then it has to remember the context of what you're talking about so that the person can speak in a natural way back and forth with the bot. That requires underneath the covers a tree of information that is connected and that retains context. And that is tricky to implement. I'll give you a quick story. I went to a talk about a year ago from Radisson Hotel, a Radisson Hotel in London, and the hotel had implemented a bot for the 200 most commonly requested things from the people who stayed in the hotel. Things like, when is room service available? Can I order something from room service? Or can I get my room changed? Or what time is checkout? That kind of thing, right? And the bot got so good that it was able to speak almost in such a natural way to the customers that the customers ended up asking it things like believing it to be a human, like, how long have you worked here? And the bot would reply, I've been at the hotel for a year. Not lying exactly, but they made it seem like it was a live person, an actual assistant helping to answer the customer's question. Well, it took that hotel over a year to tune the information to get to that 200 use cases and to get it to be natural sounding with customers. And that meant a lot of trial and error over that year and a lot of investment. So it's expensive. It can be expensive depending on the depth and complexity of the knowledge, but it can be done. So I want to talk a little bit about a unified framework for self-service that Enghouse provides called the Communications Portal, CP for short. Get into how this framework works. Now, obviously this isn't a complete sales pitch. It's really more giving you an example of a self-service engine and how it has to work in order to provide the functionality required for the kinds of self-service use cases we've been discussing. So the Communications Portal in particular is a workflow engine. It allows you to build inbound and outbound workflows or scripts that are able to interact with customers through a kind of logic. In the case of a voice configuration, we need to support in the scripting engine the ability to do speech recognition, the ability to do text to speech, and so on. In the case of that proactive outbound, the appointment reminder, for example, we need to be able to script the accessing of a data source, say a database, and the ability to then convey those outbound notifications out through a gateway, either through an email server or an SMS gateway or a PBX for voice, using pre-recorded messages. This kind of platform has to support all the different ways that you might want to connect into your infrastructure. Again, through those gateways, through your mobile website, through PBXs and PSTN connectivity, and so on. It has to plug into the communications framework of the business. And of course, an engine like this has to be high resiliency. It can't go down. You want it to be operational 7/24, so you're serving those customers anytime they want to access the system. And it has to provide a lot of things on a single server, a lot of connections from customers, what we call high density of interactions on a single device. And then it has to provide a way for you to set up and then tune and change workflow over time. And the way this tool does it is through a drag and drop graphical scripting engine, where I take these objects like you see there on the right hand side and I just drag them and connect them on the screen together. And in this case I can provide menus and loops and information access objects and so on in order to set up a really good self-service workflow. And then, and this is a very important piece, it has to be able to integrate to the contact center. Again, you can't expect that self-service will solve every problem. It'll solve a fraction of problems, hopefully a significant fraction to allow you to satisfy your customers and lower cost. But it always has to have that out to a live person. And with that out, you've got to be able to convey the data collected in the platform out to that agent so that they can see where the customer was. Where were they in the script? What problem were they trying to solve? And what data had been provided and what data had been collected from that customer. So that agent is prepared when the interaction gets to that person. Even something as simple as customer identification. Once your workflow is able to identify the customer by getting the personal information and looking them up in your database, you don't want the agent to have to do that again. So you need to convey that information out to the agent through a data level integration between the self-service engine and the contact center. Here's an example of what might be done on a mobile device. In this case, CP, the communications portal, is able to take an IVR workflow and translate that into a visual experience on a mobile device using the exact same menus and structure used for the IVR, just making them visual. Here we see a banking application. I can give accounts that this particular customer has. They can drill down into one of those accounts and see their account balance, see last few transactions. A great use case for this is fraud checking to make sure that the customer has actually performed those transactions themselves so that you are identifying fraud early. So sending them to a visual experience on a mobile device is much less painful than sending them through a complex series of, say, IVR menus. But again, as we talked about it, anytime they have to be able to get from a screen in the mobile app out to a live person. If they click on that little button, they can see their wait time in queue. We're actually integrating to the contact center here to show them how long they have to wait. Could be a time, it could be a position in queue before they get to a live person. And again, when it does get to that live person, we're then seeing all the data collected from this mobile session conveyed to that live agent. And that dramatically improves the experience for the customer and dramatically improves the time the agent has to spend on that interaction. In that Contact Babel report, in fact, they quoted the average time it takes for an agent to validate a caller's identity. It's about 35 seconds. In the case of the IVR, mobile IVR experience, where I've already validated the customer, I've shaved 35 seconds off every single call that went to an agent. It's very valuable for the customer and for the contact center to be able to do that. The architecture of the mobile IVR does support virtually every single mobile device operating system, Android, Apple, Windows, and so on, and all popular browsers, Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, and so on. So all browsers for all mobile websites and all mobile OSs. We had to be able to do that in order to make it ubiquitous, because the customer we can't control. The customer's interface to the system comes through their mobile device, and therefore we have to support everything in order to satisfy the breadth of customer environments that they're coming in with. What about proactive notifications? We spoke about this as a mechanism. We spoke about email notifications. About half of customer service centers are doing something with email notifications, and about a quarter are doing something with SMS. How does that work? Well, for the case of pre-recorded voice, you can call a customer, through an automated call, and then play the message over voice. We hear that a lot, with special offers and so on. But often you want to convey the information via text media because it is easier for the customer to work with. You can obviously reduce costs by lowering the number of inbound calls you get. An example of that might be utilities, where, say, an energy company or utility has an outage in an area, and instead of waiting for customers to call in and complain about the outage and ask when it's going to be fixed, they simply blast out a notification to all customers who live in that area saying, we're aware of the outage, we're working on it now, and it'll be fixed in 30 minutes. You've deflected a lot of that call volume by doing something like that. So there's so many use cases across so many industry sectors where this can deflect calls that you might ordinarily have received. In other words, get to the customer before they get to you, and the customer will be much happier, and you will have eliminated a lot of unnecessary live interactions with agents. Here's how the CP platform in particular does text media handling. Let's say you have an application or a database, a financial database or a retail database or whatever it might be. And through that, I can drive these notifications through a script. Now, in that little CP logic is the actual script. Believe it or not, that is the script that is able to access a database through a SQL query and then send out outbound notifications to the preferable media channel. And it might be the customer's preference, not necessarily the contact center's preference. So the customer might say, I want to get my notifications via text, or I want to get them via email. But we can blast them out through that simple script. How are we able to do that with such a simple script? Through a pre-canned, pre-developed object that allows you to dip into a database through a configurable SQL query. So under the covers here, we build a little SQL query to get access to the data, and then it does all the work to send out those notifications. And then on the back end, it tells us whether those sends actually failed or actually went through successfully. It's able to handle bounce backs where it knows whether something didn't get delivered. In that outbound notification, we've got a link. And through that link, I can potentially respond. So I can reply just through replying to a text message, or I can click on that link to go to that mobile app or mobile website and start performing interactions. So in the case of the review your recent transactions for a bank, I go directly to that account, and I can see those transactions. In the case of the appointment reminder, I can follow a link to the mobile website or mobile app to change my appointment if I need to, or to confirm it. And those kinds of things are relatively easy to implement using this mechanism. And then, of course, from the mobile app, as we saw, I can go into queue, and I can queue whatever type of live interactions the customers would like. They can request a callback where they don't have to sit there at an IVR, but they retain their position in queue. I can queue SMS texts and so that the agent can text back and forth with the customer, or chats through the mobile website, and so on. In about a month, we're releasing this intelligent capability in the platform, where now if you reply to a message, let's say, or even send in a free-form message, we can handle those via that same scripting engine, and we can integrate to any AI engine of the customer's choice. So in this case, we've implemented an integration to Microsoft Lewis, which is language understanding intelligence service. We've also explored the integration to IBM Watson. The cost of integration to an AI tool depends on the tool, and then of course also depends on that semantic network that we saw earlier that you have to build. But it's all possible. But of course we always have the hook to allow the customer to escape out to the contact center if they say are not liking the interaction with the script itself. the script itself can also be clever. It can determine if the script is not handling the customer well, and therefore we need to bring in a live person to help them. So we can do that as well. You know, we could say, play a message out to the customer, getting an expert online to help you, 30 seconds wait, and then 30 seconds later, we have an expert on the line. So that transition from an automated assistant to an expert can be done in clever ways and can be done in a way that doesn't alienate the customer. I wanted to show you really quickly let's see if I can do this here. Oops. Maybe I can. I'll show you really quickly what it might look like if I actually implemented text media back and forth in an intelligent way. What we're seeing here, and you can tell it's kind of a mocked-up demo, is the CP engine programmed to handle a very basic doctor or dental appointment thing. So if I just type hello here, there's a bit of programmatic stuff going on, and it knows who I am. So think about it. In this case, I'm interacting through instant messaging, but this could just as easily be done on a mobile through SMS. And in each of those cases, the engine knows who I am, because the very fact of me, say, texting in means that my personal information is automatically being conveyed to the system, and it's able to identify me without me having to go through extensive identification myself. So what if I say list my appointments? Then it's able to list any appointments that I have with, say, doctors. Oh, I've got a dental appointment on the 1st of June coming up. Maybe I just want to cancel that appointment because I can't make it. I can just type cancel. There's all kinds of different ways to say cancel, but I can cancel a specific appointment. I can cancel all my appointments and so on. So it's very effective at handling different ways of saying something. So then I can say, can I get an appointment for this Friday with, actually I'm actually gonna make that a dental appointment. Dental appointment for this Friday with Dr. Venice at 3:00 p.m. And here, the system actually has to know what this Friday means. This Friday is the 2nd of June. So it's able to translate that. If I would have said next Friday, it would have gotten that right. And it would have said, okay, that's June 9th. So it understands the difference between various ways of saying something. And this is using Microsoft Lewis, as we talked about, and is a very effective way of doing this. Now, it didn't cost us a huge amount to set this up because we've restricted it to a fairly narrow set of grammars. But we are able to do some pretty sophisticated things with it. And, again, sorry, I'm being challenged here with screens. Again, we're able to kind of do that in a very quick and efficient way. Okay, so I'll just put up one more slide here, just so we can kind of summarize what we see in this consolidated framework for self-service. We see that we've got a full IVR engine with text-to-speech rec and text-to-speech, and then we can program that through a graphical scripting or workflow framework. We've seen that we can handle text and voice media in this framework, and that can include both proactive outbound and, of course, intelligently handled inbound. And we've seen that at all points in a conversation or in an interaction, we're able to hook back into the contact center in order to get to live people and to convey that data collected in that self-service session to those live people. So they're able to provide a productive, efficient, and high quality experience to the customer. So that's what we've got working here. And hopefully you were able to kind of tie the different pieces together. Hopefully this has been useful. So with that, I will turn it over for questions. And of course, feel free at any time to type those questions in to the chat or questions area of the GoToWebinar. And we'll take those at this time.
Okay. Thank you, John. As John has just said, any questions, type them into the chat pane in the GoToWebinar interface. We've had one come in, so I'll start with that one. John, what do you see as the biggest obstacles for organisations when it comes to introducing self-service to their customer experience options?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we talked a bit about the challenges. Had that on a slide over here. But the actual actually, let's put that slide up while I deliver this answer. Key challenges. Here are some of those challenges, but I think there's actually a more significant challenge, and that is in the area of what your customers are actually asking for. You know, it's one thing to identify which channels of communication you need to support for those customers, but it's another to actually listen to them and figure out where you would provide self-service of the most benefit to them. So the key here is looking at your reporting for your, say, contact center on what agents are most frequently handling that you believe can be automated, and tackling that first, the biggest bang for the buck, as we referred to earlier. So if you're able to listen to the customer and do the thing that would help them the most, then you will be immediately successful out of the gate. And you know, we commonly, when we're talking to customers about best practices and where they're going to see the biggest customer satisfaction from a service like this, we always look at the high runners first. We always look at the most popular self-service requests or service requests and what's sort of killing the agents today. And we suggest doing those first, even if they might be a bit more complex.
Hey, right, well that's everything from today. I think we haven't got any more questions come through at this point. So thank you everyone